Shirley MacLaine is as close to Hollywood royalty as you can get. It's not only her powerful and successful family background, but also the fact that she's an Oscar winner and a respected author. For many people, this kind of life would be beyond their wildest dreams, but for Shirley, being a Hollywood aristocrat is just the day job. The rest of the time, she's an Egyptian princess, a medieval knight, and a UFO observer. And we're not talking about her acting roles here. She's one of the last stars of the golden age of Hollywood who is still with us. But how exactly did Shirley MacLaine go from being a screen goddess to a reincarnated Egyptian deity? Welcome to Hollywood Mysteries. Some people are simply destined for the spotlight, and Shirley MacLaine was clearly one of them. Born on April 24, 1934, in Richmond, Virginia, she was named Shirley MacLaine Beatty after the child megastar of the era, Shirley Temple. Her father, Ira Owens Beatty, was a psychology professor. His life was one of deep personal struggle, and he spent much of it battling alcoholism. His efforts to find peace led him to investigate a whole variety of New Age spiritual ideas that were emerging in the 1920s and 30s. It was from him that Shirley would inherit her own spirituality. She recalled, "He told me about the out-of-body experience he had when he cracked up the car. He said he went out of his body and met with his own father and mother again. He said he saw the light of God around them and knew that light was his real home. He wanted to go there, into the light, but something stopped him. A voice, maybe, who told him he needed to go back to his life on Earth and finish the work he had agreed to do. He said he had contracted to have his life with our family, and he knew he wasn't finished." While Shirley's father influenced her spiritual views, it was probably her mother, Kathleen, who was actually responsible for picking her name. Originally from Nova Scotia, Kathleen was a drama teacher who was something of a Hollywood fangirl. Shirley remembered, "Mother was an artist and actress and loved to read poetry. Her mother was the Dean of Women at Acadia University in Wolfville, Nova Scotia, Canada. And Mother's father was a brain surgeon, one of the best in Canada, I'm told." Kathleen's passion for acting was something she passed on to her children, and it was clear that Shirley wasn't the only one in the family destined for fame. Her younger brother Warren would go on to become just as famous as her, adopting the name Warren Beatty with a second T in his professional surname. The Beatty family was not financially well off, especially with Shirley growing up during the Great Depression. Shirley later remembered her childhood, explaining, "For example, during the Great Depression, my family never had more than $300 in the bank, and we were taught to save for the future because one never knew when it could happen again. I remember I was confused over the declaration of war I heard Roosevelt announce through the old-fashioned radio in the living room." Although Kathleen Beatty hoped her children would one day be performers, she kept those dreams to herself. She raised them within the boundaries of the strict Baptist traditions that were prevalent in the Old Dominion at the time. Kathleen had learned the importance of keeping secrets, especially since her brother-in-law was a communist and later served in Ontario's provincial legislature. Had his political views been revealed in 1930s America, the family would have been under serious suspicion, and by the 1950s they would have been persecuted, especially in Hollywood. Given her background, Kathleen could not have anticipated the wild ideas her daughter would eventually get into. Shirley explained, "I've never had a problem telling people how I feel or what I'm learning. I've never been worried about other people's reactions. I don't know why. My mother was Canadian, so if it was just her, then I'd have that problem. But my dad was a small-town person from Virginia, and in those small towns you just said what you thought, as long as you really believed it." Kathleen Beatty was determined to nurture her daughter's talent for performing, which led her to insist that Shirley take ballet lessons. But in the Baptist community, dance lessons were seen as an extravagance. When her Baptist friends criticized the idea, Kathleen cooked up a white lie and explained that it was for medical reasons. She claimed Shirley had weak ankles and that the doctor had advised ballet to help strengthen them. Shirley, for her part, loved ballet. At home, she practiced by twirling around the house on her tiny toes. She never forgot her first performance. "I was 4 and I did a number called An Apple for the Teacher at the Mosque Theater in Richmond, Virginia, the city where my parents were living at the time. I tripped on the curtain, the audience laughed, and little ham that I was, I ate it up. After that, I tripped on that curtain every time I passed it. As Shirley grew older, she took on bigger parts in the recitals. She often chose to play the male roles, which was not surprising since ballet lessons were extremely uncommon for boys in Virginia at the time. Being the tallest girl in the class, she was naturally cast in these roles. After many performances, Shirley finally landed the lead role in Cinderella. However, this role would make her realize the limits of her abilities. While warming up backstage, she twisted her ankle, not a little ironic given the whole story about her medical need to learn ballet. But she danced through the pain and finished the performance. Nevertheless, this was also the day she knew she would never be skilled enough to dance professionally. She later said, "I was never good enough to be a soloist. Quatre ballet was about all I could handle. I didn't have those beautifully constructed feet, high arches, high insteps. My extension on my left leg was pretty good, but I didn't point my foot with that grace that suggests true beauty." The Beatty family moved frequently while Shirley was growing up. Ira was constantly looking for work across Virginia. They eventually settled in Arlington when he secured a teaching job at Thomas Jefferson Junior High School. By the time Shirley was old enough to attend the school where her father worked, she had already found a way to stand out, in her usual unconventional style. She used his influence to get a spot on the boys' baseball team, and soon enough she was setting records for the most home runs. Her teammates started calling her a powerhouse, thanks to her slugging ability. This was all pretty good fun, but Shirley was restless. She wanted to try something truly different, like life in a big city. Eventually, she convinced her parents to let her spend the summer before her senior year in New York City. Her father was not so thrilled about the idea of her moving so far away, but her mother was excited that Shirley was dreaming of becoming an actress, and so Mom helped arrange the trip. New York City was the perfect place for a young, aspiring performer. Shirley said, "NYC was the ultimate. I got into the subway circuit show of Oklahoma and discovered I loved musical comedy more than ballet. When Rodgers and Hammerstein asked me to join the London company, my dad was disappointed that I wouldn't finish high school. So I turned Rodgers and Hammerstein down and went home to graduate. I've never regretted that, although I never learned much in school except how to type." By the time Shirley was graduating Washington Lee High School, her family had settled into a comfortable home in Arlington's Dominion Hill neighborhood. She was able to enjoy the perks of a typical 1950s middle-class life, now that Ira was settled into a good teaching job. Shirley described her high school days as being pretty much the 1950s ideal of the American dream. She said, "My high school was about cheerleading, football games, dancing classes, and boys. When I graduated and went back to New York, I was ready to succeed. I got into a Serval icebox trade show and danced accomplished pirouettes around a Serval ice maker. It was so boring that one night I blacked out my 2 front teeth for a joke and got fired. We had traveled around the country with the refrigerators on a train, so I learned about stage door Johnnies who wanted their drinks straight up, never mind the ice, and could they have the pleasure of experiencing a showgirl? I said no, I'm a dancer." When Shirley returned to New York City in May 1953, she immediately began auditioning for every role she could find. She eventually landed her first part as a chorus girl in the musical, Me and Juliet. Though she was thrilled, she quickly realized the job didn't pay much. As she later explained, "I had only enough money for lunch and dinner at the automat, usually a peanut butter sandwich and lemonade. The chorus line was a family to me, but I knew I wanted to be out there singing a song and acting." It wasn't long after arriving in New York that Shirley met Steve Parker, a businessman who was 11 years older than her but still youthful and particularly charming. The two hit it off and got married in 1954. Their marriage would go on to become one of Hollywood's longest, as well as one of its most unconventional. They spent much of their married life living apart, sometimes on opposite sides of the world. Shirley later admitted that they maintained an open relationship, where both were free to date and sleep with others. She explained her views on married love, saying, "I think the need to promise to be with someone until the end of your days is foolish. I think the challenge of love is more about sustaining a relationship with yourself. If you don't have that with yourself, you can't have it with others. Relationships keep changing too, so I guess the only thing consistent is change, really." As Me and Juliet came to an end in April 1954, Shirley's luck began to shift. Though she had been on Broadway for some time, she felt that she hadn't yet reached her full potential. Things started to turn around when she recalled, Hal Prince and Freddie Brisson came down to the basement where the chorus kids dressed and asked if any of us wanted to invest in a new musical they were putting together called The Pajama Game. I said I couldn't afford an investment, but would like to audition for the show. They said fine. This led to Shirley being cast as the understudy for The Pajama Game, while Carol Haney got the lead. Shirley was so impressed by Carol Haney's professionalism that she never imagined she would ever actually replace her. She even considered leaving for another show nearby until fate stepped in. Shirley recalled, a few nights later, Carol sprained her ankle. Haney is out, they said. You're on. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I'm on, without a rehearsal. I didn't know what key I sang in. I didn't know the dialogue or the lyrics. And I didn't know whether Carol's clothes would fit. There I was, waiting in the wings. When the announcer said Carol Haney would be out and I would replace her, there were boos from the orchestra to the second balcony. To her surprise, Shirley managed to get through the performance without many mistakes, and the show seemed to end as quickly as it had started. She recalled, when the show was over, I took my bows with the other two steam heat dancers. The audience stood up. Never had I been so lonely, but I knew deep inside that the destiny of my life was now in alignment. Ultimately, Carol Haney never returned to the show, and Shirley remained with the production until it ended months later. In November of 1956, while still working on The Pajama Game, she was noticed by the big shot film producer Hal B. Wallace. She remembered, Wallace took me to dinner where I nearly ate the menu too. He invited me to do a screen test with Danny Mann. When I showed up for the screen test, Danny asked what scene I would like to do. I told him I didn't know any, and I didn't know anything about acting anyway. He asked someone for a high stool, then told me to sit on it, and we just talked. I did a few steps with a long scarf and sang something quietly so he wouldn't be able to tell I couldn't sing. He smiled through it all, and I guess I did too. Wallace saw the test and signed me to a contract. What looked like little more than a rare free meal turned out to be much more, and Shirley found herself on her way to Hollywood. When Shirley arrived in Hollywood, she quickly realized she would need a screen name. She wanted to honor her family but also stand out when her name was up in lights. So she decided to use her mother's maiden name of MacLaine as inspiration. She chose Shirley MacLaine. It seems to have paid off as her first big screen role came in 1955's The Trouble with Harry, where she worked under the legendary Alfred Hitchcock, quite a way to make a debut. The film is an eccentric murder mystery set in a charming Vermont town. As the story unfolds, the locals lose interest in solving the crime, and it's eventually revealed that the man died from natural causes. As the plot progresses, the focus shifts from the mystery to two love stories. One between an elderly captain and a spinster, and the other between a young widow and her equally young suitor. The Trouble with Harry was one of the lightest films Alfred Hitchcock ever made, which caught some people off guard, especially those expecting his usual seat-gripping suspense. However, when viewers approached it as a romantic comedy rather than a mystery, it proved to be an enjoyable film in its own right. The movie was also considered quite provocative for its time. In one scene, John Forsythe's character tells Shirley he wants to paint her in the nude. This all helped shape Shirley MacLaine's reputation as an actress who was more than willing to push a few boundaries. Her role as Jennifer Rogers earned her a Golden Globe Award for Best New Female Star of the Year and a BAFTA nomination for Best Foreign Actress. This was a brilliant start, and things would get even better from here, although she did have to slow her career down right as it was heating up when she discovered she was pregnant. After a break to focus on the birth of her daughter Sakshi, Shirley returned to work in Hot Spell in 1958. But it was her performance in Some Came Running from the same year that brought her her first Academy Award nomination, along with a Golden Globe nomination for Best Actress. At this point, Shirley's career was still finding its footing. She had already risked losing out in the 2-year break she was forced to take when she fell pregnant. Not wanting to be tied down by the responsibilities of raising a child, she sent Sakshi to live with her father in Japan. Although Sakshi returned to the United States from time to time, once even appearing with Shirley on the cover of Life magazine in 1958, Shirley definitively prioritized her career over motherhood. With her husband and child on the other side of the world, she set about making a succession of films that would elevate her to the Hollywood elite. She next starred in Ask Any Girl, where her portrayal of Meg Wheeler won her a BAFTA Award for Best Foreign Actress and a Silver Bear for Best Actress at the Berlin International Film Festival. Then she moved on to Can-Can in 1960, where she starred alongside Frank Sinatra. The picture was a great fit for her, as she got to show off her dance background while performing the iconic Parisian routine of the film's title. Shirley's next Oscar nomination came for one of her most iconic roles, that of Fran Kubelik in Billy Wilder's masterpiece, The Apartment. Working with Wilder and her co-star Jack Lemmon taught her a whole new side of acting. She later wrote, "My life in films has been basically an education in human behavior, not only in terms of acting, but also in the science of trust. The Billy Wilder, Jack Lemmon years were instructions in comedy. We never had a completed script when we started, but Jack had a track record with Billy, and I was new to the equation. Billy trusted the chemistry between Jack and me, and we trusted his judgment." Shirley didn't bag the Oscar for The Apartment, but she did receive several prestigious awards, including a BAFTA for Best Foreign Actress, a Golden Globe for Best Actress in a Motion Picture Musical or Comedy, and a Volpe Cup from the Venice International Film Festival. Still, she wasn't pleased about losing the Academy Award to Elizabeth Taylor, who won for Butterfield 8. MacLaine was particularly frustrated because Taylor had recently undergone surgery, and Shirley thought she might have gained a few sympathy votes. She quipped, "I thought I would win for The Apartment, but then Elizabeth Taylor had a tracheotomy." There would be other chances, but this particular vein of success was about to run dry. 1961 was a rough year for Shirley, both personally and professionally. She spoke about it in a later interview, saying, 1961 proved to be an uneasy mix for my career and personal life. I continued to find myself starring in thin sex farce comedies, and All in a Night's Work was no exception. She later joked about her typecasting, saying, "I've made so many movies playing a hooker that they don't pay me in the regular way anymore. They leave it on the dresser." Things finally took a turn when Shirley starred alongside James Garner and Audrey Hepburn in The Children's Hour. This project was far more artistically interesting to Shirley, as it was based on Lillian Hellman's controversial play. In this film, MacLaine played a character involved in a potentially lesbian relationship with Hepburn's character. Variety led with positive reviews for both actresses, writing, "Audrey Hepburn and Shirley MacLaine in the leading roles beautifully complement each other. MacLaine's enactment is almost equally rich in depth and substance." Shirley received Golden Globe nominations for Best Actress in a Motion Picture Musical or Comedy for both The Children's Hour and for her next picture, Irma la Douce. For Irma la Douce, she was dedicated to perfecting her role. She was delighted to be working with Billy Wilder and Jack Lemmon again, and while in Paris, she took some unusual steps to prepare for this movie. She recalled, "Without Billy's knowledge, Jack and I went to Paris's Le Halles district and spent 2 days in a house of ill repute to study and observe the working girls. I learned so much in those 2 days. There are certain inalienable traditions to the world of prostitution, such as never removing one's shoes, or the speed at which they accomplish their goals, sometimes turning 17 tricks in an hour. There is an unbelievable sense of camaraderie and mutual respect among the girls, but there is also a sadness and spiritual emptiness in them. The realization that Danielle and many of the others were hooked on dope and were working only to satisfy their drug habits had a profound impact on my life." Irma la Douce was a huge success. However, MacLaine confessed that she wasn't fully impressed with Irma la Douce. She admitted, "I was afraid I would get the Oscar for Irma la Douce because it was popular, but I didn't want to because I really didn't think it was that good." While filming Two for the Seesaw in 1962, Shirley began a long affair with her co-star Robert Mitchum, which, according to MacLaine, lasted until Mitchum's death in 1997. She later explained, "Life is full of little mysteries and Robert was one of them. I had always had a crush on this man and it began to surface when the cameras began to roll. At first it was the kidding between us that Robert Wise, the director, couldn't stand. Wise often displayed his displeasure, but this thing between Mitchum and I had started and it was too late to turn back. Mitchum, a gentle giant of a man who seemed to have no ambition, no dreams to fulfill, and no drive to prove anything to anyone, fascinated me." Shirley would later recommend Mitchum for the role of Rod Anderson, Jr. in 1964's What a Way to Go, a film that earned her yet another BAFTA nomination for her performance as Louisa May Foster. However, she admitted, "Everyone on the film felt that it would be a blockbuster. Unfortunately, we were all wrong." Ironically, What a Way to Go symbolized the dream of wealth with its lavishness, but the title and symbolism were not prophetic in reality. The film was a dud. By this time, MacLaine was determined to use her fame for something more than just wealth and fame. In 1964, she took a small break from acting to visit Bhutan, a small country in Asia. She was thrilled when she learned that she would have the chance to dine with the Prime Minister, Landhup Dorji. Expecting to meet an elderly man in traditional robes, she was surprised to encounter a young, stylish man who introduced himself as Lenny. He shared stories of his travels across the United States, hitchhiking to get a better understanding of the country. Shirley later confessed, "I was thrown off completely. This Bhutanese chief of state had slept in Grand Central Station, and people thought he was a Chinese laundryman." The pair were often spotted in fashionable spots around London in the following year. After finishing the yellow Rolls-Royce in Europe, MacLaine had yet another adventure that seemed straight out of a film. Her handsome French co-star Alain Delon proposed that they take a trip to Monte Carlo in his new Ferrari. But it would be anything but a relaxing Sunday drive. She recalled, "After the picture was finished, Alain asked me to take a drive with him in a new race car, a Formula something or other. It became a surreal experience as we drove all night from Italy to Monaco at 110 miles per hour. He told me at the beginning of the trip not to speak, as it would break his concentration, and warned me that if I did not adhere to these rules, he would stop the car and let me out. We made the journey in record time, but I flew back to Italy via airplane." Delon was a man who liked to live dangerously. Very dangerously, as it turned out. And you can hear all about that story in our episode on Alain, linked on screen now and in the description. Once back in Hollywood, MacLaine earned nominations for Golden Globe Awards for Best Actress in a Motion Picture, Musical, or Comedy for Gambit in 1966 and Woman x7 in 1967. In Gambit, she earned Michael Caine's eternal gratitude. Caine later said, "That's how I got into Hollywood. She was very kind. All those stories I've heard about stars being awkward and standoffish, but here was a superstar, one of the most powerful women in Hollywood, going out of her way for me. I'll always remember her for that. She was the passport to glamour for me." In Woman x7, she seriously impressed audiences by portraying 7 different women in a single film. In 1968, MacLaine stepped in at the last minute to star in The Bliss of Mrs. Blossom. There were rumors that the director was so eager to get her for the role that he paid her $750,000 for the part. Regardless, MacLaine enjoyed the experience and the film was another hit. By now, MacLaine was as box office as it gets. She used her fame to help others she believed deserved a chance, similar to how she had taken Michael Caine under her wing. This time, she was about to launch the career of a major director. She recalled, "Lew Wasserman, head of Universal Pictures, called me into his office. I remember his desk was completely empty and clear, and asked me what I wanted to do next. I answered, 'Sweet Charity, and Bob Fosse should direct it.' Lew said Bob was just a choreographer. I said okay, but so is Stanley Donen. Lew agreed and sent for Fosse. The experience with Fosse on Charity was magical. Of course, he apologized through swirls of cigarette smoke for making us do it a few more times, but he was brilliant, and it launched his picture career." Not everyone was in her good books, however. While filming Two Mules for Sister Sarah in 1970, Shirley had a tough time with director Don Siegel. During the shoot in Mexico, MacLaine, like many of the other cast members, fell ill, which sapped her energy. But she was as hard-headed as ever, and Siegel struggled to work with her. He later commented, "It's hard to feel any great warmth to her. She's too unfeminine and has too much balls. She's very, very hard." Shirley had long been criticized for not being beautiful enough by Hollywood standards, and Siegel's jibes were just the latest remarks of this nature. But Shirley was unaffected. In fact, she saw her unconventional looks as an advantage in her career. She once said, "I wasn't afraid of getting old, because I was never a great beauty. I mean, no one asks what beauty secrets of me, or what size do you wear, or who's your couturier. They ask me about really deep things, and I love that." That same year, MacLaine also publicly opened up about her spiritual journey, which had become an integral part of her life. It was very much in keeping with the zeitgeist for people to express their interest in the new spiritual ideas that had become popular in America since the mid-1960s. But this hippie movement did not appear out of nowhere, and in fact, the roots of alternative spirituality in California could be traced back to at least the 1920s and beyond. Shirley, of course, had grown up in an atmosphere that was a mixture of Baptist and the burgeoning New Age movement. She published her first book, Don't Fall Off the Mountain, in which she chronicled her search for spiritual enlightenment. Though some of her more unconventional beliefs were laughed at, she was firm in expressing her findings. She said, "I would have an absolutely impossible time saying things I don't believe. I couldn't do it. I don't have the smarts. I don't have the intelligence to deceive. I'm really dumb about that. So I just say what I feel, what has been my experience." Away from spirituality, MacLaine's career continued to thrive, and her role in 1971's Desperate Characters earned her some of the best reviews of her career. One critic noted, "Shirley MacLaine achieves one of the great performances of the year. She proves that we were right when we saw her in films like The Apartment, to know that she really had it all, could go all the way with a serious role." In the same year, MacLaine took an unexpected step and starred in her own television series, Shirley's World. On the show, she played Shirley Logan, a photojournalist traveling the globe for her assignments. Unfortunately, the show was a ratings bomb and lasted only one season. The following year, MacLaine tried out the increasingly nuanced horror genre by starring in The Possession of Joel Delaney, but would later whip up a firestorm of controversy over a scene in which 11-year-old child actor David Elliott had to dance naked on a table. The scene was not included in the script and was forced on the boy at the last moment by Indian director Waris Hussain. This scene and other sketchy events during the filming, such as a knife scene shot without any safety protocols, have seen the picture go down as one of the worst examples of child exploitation in Hollywood. Next, MacLaine found time to write a very different kind of book. In 1972, she co-wrote McGovern, The Man and His Beliefs, a political biography of the Democratic presidential candidate, George McGovern, whom she strongly supported in the race against Richard Nixon. In fact, she quit show business for a year to go on the election trail with McGovern. All this was to no avail as Nixon won a crushing landslide against McGovern. McGovern was a grassroots candidate with a strong anti-war stance and came with a raft of progressive policies. However, he had also been instrumental in reforming the Democratic Party nomination system to one which favored candidates with popular support, as opposed to those who were already well established. This move enraged many senior figures in the Democrat elite, who then backed Nixon over McGovern and launched a media sabotage campaign against him, notoriously labeling him as a candidate for amnesty, abortion, and acid. For all Shirley's campaigning energy, McGovern was at an enormous funding disadvantage, with his own party largely choosing not to back him, and instead getting behind the pro-war Nixon. McGovern lost every state aside from Massachusetts. Ironically, this was the election that led to the Watergate scandal, in which Nixon was found to have spied on his Democratic rivals at the Watergate Hotel. If he'd known that McGovern had little more than Shirley MacLaine on his side, perhaps he might not have bothered taking the risk. Frustrated at the political shenanigans at home, in 1973 Shirley MacLaine traveled to China with a group of American women. At that time, China's reputation in the West was exclusively negative, but Shirley claimed that, quote, "In China, the equality of women is an official fact. In America, we haven't achieved it. I'm curious to see how it all compares." 2 years later, she wrote, produced, and starred in a documentary based on the trip. Her documentary, The Other Half of the Sky, a China memoir, won MacLaine her first Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature, although it was snubbed by critics. One reviewer noted, "The film evolves as a generally eye-catching spectrum of happy people in such places as homes, farms, daycare centers, city communes, hospitals, the Great Wall, the ballet, and Peking's May Day celebration," which was apparently appreciated by the inquisitive tourists and their cooperative hosts. Nowhere, however, is there an indication of crime, poverty, deprivation, or unhappiness among China's 800 million people. Now in her 40s, MacLaine returned to Broadway in 1976 for a one-woman revue, her first on the stage in decades. She performed for 2 weeks in April and received such a warm reception that she returned for another 2-week engagement in July. The revue was one of her most successful projects, followed by a memorable appearance in the television musical Gypsy in My Soul, which earned her a Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Variety, Music, or Comedy Special. Then in 1977, MacLaine took on a role in The Turning Point, playing a former ballerina who can no longer dance professionally. Her performance alongside Anne Bancroft earned her an Academy Award nomination for Best Actress. MacLaine later reflected on this period, saying, "I think in my 40s, right around the time of The Turning Point, that I began to address myself more to the future. See, I wasn't afraid of getting old, because I never had the problems the other actresses my age had. I was never a great beauty. I was never a sex symbol. I did, however, have great legs, because I was a dancer. But I didn't have that baggage. I wasn't interested in my stature as a star, ever." MacLaine's movie career continued with some great roles, including her performances in Being There in 1979, for which she earned nominations for both a BAFTA and a Golden Globe. She also tackled marital infidelity in films such as A Change of Seasons and Loving Couples, which were both released in 1980. While working with Anthony Hopkins on Being There, the two clashed. Hopkins, a renowned prima donna, would later call MacLaine the most obnoxious actress I have ever worked with. As the 1970s gave way to the 1980s, the political atmosphere shifted, especially with the election of former actor Ronald Reagan as president. During this time, however, MacLaine found herself involved in a new cause, the fight against AIDS. She began noticing that many young men in New York were falling ill with a mysterious disease that was eventually identified as AIDS. As the illness spread, MacLaine became vocal about the need to fight the prejudice surrounding it. She said, "I don't give a crap if you're homosexual, heterosexual, bisexual, or if you like a lamppost. If you stick to one lamppost, you're going to know more about yourself if love is there. And I think maybe there's a universal message that we haven't understood, that through love of one person in the sense of experiencing the balance of what the soul is, health results." In 1982, MacLaine shocked her friends by announcing that she and her husband, with whom she had been married for nearly 30 years, were divorcing. Their marriage had always been unconventional, and she had had many affairs over the years. Aside from Mitchum, she also had romances with actors like Danny Kaye and Yves Montand. In fact, she said the only two leading men she starred opposite that she didn't fall in love with were Jack Lemmon and Jack Nicholson. She also had long affairs with British statesman Lord Mountbatten, who was later assassinated by the IRA, as well as Andrew Peacock, who was serving as Australia's foreign minister at the time. She said, "Because I was having affairs in every country around the world, an old lover of mine said, 'Why don't you just have a license plate made up that says fuck Americans?' I thought that was witty." MacLaine was philosophical about the split, stating, "The greatest love you can give someone is allow them to feel they have the freedom to go. That's their free will. This is the greatest love you can feel for someone." In 1983, MacLaine had a standout year, releasing her fourth and most important book, Out on a Limb. That same year, she starred in Terms of Endearment, a role that finally won her an Academy Award for Best Actress. The legendary Bette Davis had this to say about Shirley: "At least Terms of Endearment was an authentic film about relationships. And I must say that Miss Shirley MacLaine gave an outstanding performance. But then she's always good." Not everything to do with Terms of Endearment was harmonious, though. In fact, very few terms of endearment were ever exchanged between MacLaine and her co-star, Deborah Winger, and they embarked on one of Hollywood's most legendary feuds. Winger was the hot young actress of the early 1980s, and when she showed up to meet Shirley in combat boots and a miniskirt, the fur-coated veteran was not impressed. "Oh my God," MacLaine remembered thinking on first sight. She snubbed Winger, considering her a nobody. The rebellious Winger was not fazed by Shirley's star power. In one heated exchange, Deborah told Shirley to get over here, when she believed Shirley had missed her marks. "I heard you," I said. "I know marks when I see them," Shirley haughtily responded. And this caused Deborah to pull up her skirt and pass gas right in MacLaine's face. Jack Nicholson allegedly watched on with great amusement. MacLaine returned to Broadway in 1984 with Shirley MacLaine on Broadway. The show ran for 6 weeks in the spring, and although MacLaine enjoyed the experience, she later confessed that she wasn't sure if Broadway was for her anymore. You can't do anything else, and you can't run quickly for a cab in the rain, and you can't have a drunken love affair. You can't do any of that. because you've got to be perfectly healthy. And I guess I value enjoying my life a little bit more than the discipline these days." During the mid-1980s, Shirley MacLaine took a step back from acting to focus on writing. She released Dancing in the Light in 1986 and followed it with It's All in the Playing in 1987. These books went far deeper into some of the more controversial aspects of her life. She wrote about her belief in reincarnation, her many encounters with UFOs, and her views on meditation and the healing power of crystals. She also came out of a closet of sorts when she finally found the nerve to reveal to the world she was in fact the reincarnated spirit of the brother of a 35,000-year-old Atlantean deity named Ramtha. Not surprisingly, the reaction to these books was somewhat divided. When she returned to acting in 1987, MacLaine played herself in a TV miniseries based on her 1983 memoir, Out on a Limb. The miniseries was popular among her fans and earned her a Golden Globe nomination for Best Actress in a Miniseries or Television Film. In 1989, MacLaine's role as Weiser Boudreaux in Steel Magnolias became one of the most beloved performances of her career. Her performances, including Steel Magnolias, were often connected to her New Age beliefs, especially by the early 1990s. In Postcards from the Edge, she humorously sang a version of I'm Still Here, with altered lyrics that included, I'm feeling transcendental, am I here? Her role as Doris Mann, a fictionalized version of Debbie Reynolds, earned her yet more awards to add to her vast collection. In the same year, she starred in Waiting for the Light, playing a retired magician who stirs up trouble in a small town with her illusions of ghosts and goblins. However, these beliefs did not manifest in a happy relationship with her own daughter. In fact, in 2013, Saxby Parker would release a book called Lucky Me, My Life with and Without My Mom, Shirley MacLaine, a title dripping with irony. She detailed her strong feelings of abandonment and spoke about how her mother would never see her for more than 4 hours at a time before getting bored and leaving. She also revealed that when she was sent to Japan at age 2, MacLaine sent her on the voyage alone. The propeller-driven planes of the era took 2 days to make the trip, and she was handed over to the care of the stewardess for the entirety of the journey, an experience that Saxby never got over. To make matters worse, she had a poor relationship with her father, who was verbally abusive to her, nicknaming her the idiot. Her father was also maintaining several expensive affairs and would often leave his young daughter alone at home for an entire night. As a teen, she was packed off to boarding school in Europe. One year, neither parent showed up to collect her for the Christmas holidays. I laugh now, she said, but I have to say at the time it was very scary and very painful, and I actually had a physical pain in my heart. MacLaine's divorce from Parker came about when she realized he had been taking huge amounts of money from her without her consent. This was despite the fact she had already set up an extremely generous allowance for her husband. On the other hand, when Saxby asked her mother for $500 to buy a car, the only deal on the table was a loan, with interest. In 1992, MacLaine starred in Used People, a film that allowed her to explore life in a dysfunctional Jewish and Italian family in the borough of Queens during the 1960s. The film wasn't a major hit with critics, but MacLaine's performance charmed reviewers. Roger Ebert noted, MacLaine is a pro and survives the material, her character emerging intact from the confusion. It is some kind of miracle that her Pearl, surrounded by emotional upheaval and an undisciplined screenplay, does become a real person, one we care about. In 1994, Shirley had to go through a moment of grief, but it was one which deepened her connection to her spiritual beliefs. While filming Guarding Tess in Baltimore, her mother, Kathleen Beatty, fell ill. Shirley rushed to see her, and Kathleen was pleased to see her daughter one last time in the city where she had once lived as a young bride. MacLaine herself had been conceived there, and her father had passed away in the same city a few years earlier. After her mother's death, MacLaine had a profound metaphysical experience. She discovered a letter her mother had written to her 25 years earlier, which seemed to predict events involving her daughter and husband. MacLaine said, "The letter had to do with my daughter and husband. Mother was warning me about certain things. I broke down and cried. Had I understood that letter 25 years before, it would have altered the course of my life." Back on set, rumors began to emerge that she had begun another affair, this time with her guarding Tess co-star, Nicolas Cage, who was some 30 years her junior. MacLaine returned to the big screen in 1996 with a sequel to Terms of Endearment, called The Evening Star. While the film did not reach the same level of success as its predecessor, MacLaine's portrayal of Aurora Greenway was a hit with her fans. She had a bigger success with her role in Mrs. Winterbourne, later the same year. 2 years later, MacLaine received the prestigious Golden Globe Cecil B. DeMille Award for her contributions to film. In 1997, Robert Mitchum passed away, age 79, from lung cancer. Their affair had lasted more or less until the end. He was just extremely intelligent, hidden, but he was very, very intelligent, she recalled. MacLaine's later career included roles in A Smile Like Yours and Joan of Arc, followed by her first directorial effort in Bruno, which came in the year 2000. The film about a boy with the power to heal others was a natural fit for MacLaine's spiritual interests. She claimed that she was helped in her direction by the spirits of people she had known in the past. Colin Higgins came to me while directing. He wasn't the only one. I'd call on Bob Fosse, Hitchcock, and Willie Wyler. As far as I'm concerned, nobody dies. They just change form. The film didn't set the world alight, but one critic noted, "Movie director most likely won't be Miss MacLaine's ultimate incarnation, but she has asserted this particular self with her distinctive idiosyncratic vision." In 2002, Shirley MacLaine took on the role of Rebecca Nurse in the television miniseries Salem Witch Trials. Rebecca was the oldest woman to be accused during the infamous witch trials in 17th century Salem, Massachusetts. MacLaine later explained her approach to the character. As Rebecca Nurse, a devoutly religious elder, I chose to wear no makeup and only the undergarments of the time while we were filming. Rebecca was a 71-year-old that had raised 8 children and was highly respected among her fellow Puritans. After she was accused of being a witch, she was indicted on June 2nd and forced to undergo a physical examination to determine whether or not she carried the mark of the devil, which could be an anomaly of the skin. The examiners found what they believed to be the mark, and on July 19th she was driven in a cart to Gallows Hill where she was hanged. The dignity of her character, which she showed throughout the trials, undoubtedly helped turn public opinion against the trials, which ended shortly after her death. In the same year, MacLaine played a more lighthearted character in Hell on Heels, The Battle of Mary Kay, a semi-satirical biopic about Mary Kay Ash, the founder of Mary Kay Cosmetics. Then she released Out on a Leash, Exploring the Nature of Reality and Love, a book exploring the unique bond between humans and animals. She reflected, "Out on a Leash is a view of the world through my eyes and the eyes of Terry the Rat Terrier, my faithful, unconditionally loving companion who has taught me to view life with a different attitude. While we coexist in this reality, we also experience and express all around us in very different ways. Humans say they love, animals just do it." MacLaine's 2005 appearance in Rumor Has It alongside Jennifer Aniston and Kevin Costner could have been a classic Hollywood tale, but the movie fell way short of the hype. The story centers on a young woman who believes her grandmother might have been the original Mrs. Robinson from The Graduate. A critic summed it up by saying, "I suppose Rumor Has It could be worse, though at the moment I'm at a loss to say just how." MacLaine had more success with her role in Bewitched, playing Endora in a movie based on the beloved TV show. However, her portrayal in Her Shoes bagged her yet more award nominations. One critic said she had found her finest role since the Oscar-winning Terms of Endearment. After a role in Closing the Ring in 2007, MacLaine starred as Coco Chanel in a 2008 TV movie about the iconic designer. Also in 2008, she appeared in Anne of Green Gables, A New Beginning, a small-scale TV production that she chose as a tribute to her mother, who had loved the books growing up. MacLaine's next bold role came in 2011, when she starred in Bernie, a dark comedy about a wealthy woman who is murdered by her popular son, based on a real-life incident in East Texas. The film explored the idea of how material wealth affects a person's character. After this, she once more shifted her focus back to writing. She published I'm Over All That and Other Confessions in 2011. I have learned to ease up on worry, scheming for films or roles, planning for better surroundings, and feeling anger at all our leaders who operate politically rather than humanely. Yes, I am over all that. I'm over listening to advertisements, the latest fashions. I never was much for that. Events I should attend in order to be seen, red carpet madness. I'm getting more and more free from the expectations of the external world. In fact, the one worry I can't seem to give up and get over is a lingering fear that being a reclusive, happy older woman may not be entirely healthy. But who says so? One thing will always be a constant with me. I have a guiding sense of curiosity. I will never get over asking why. MacLaine's return to acting came soon enough, though, when she joined the cast of Downton Abbey in 2012. Her role as Martha Levinson, the lively American mother of Lady Cora Crawley, was a huge hit with fans. She explained, "I didn't know Downton Abbey. I learned about it at my hairdresser. All the girls were talking about it. They were trying to figure out who was Elizabeth McGovern's mother, and whether she was a Rothschild, whether she was Jewish. The next thing I knew, I got a call from my agent about playing Elizabeth McGovern's mother. I'd better look at this, and whoa, I got addicted for a full week." Her performance was so well received that she was written into an additional episode the following season. Through the rest of the 2010s, she showed little sign of letting up. She starred alongside Jessica Lange in Wild Oats, and 2 years later in 2018, MacLaine appeared in the live-action family film, The Little Mermaid. In 2022, MacLaine returned to television, joining Steve Martin, Martin Short, and Selena Gomez in the critically acclaimed Hulu series, Only Murders in the Building. And in 2024, her film, American Dreamer, finally opened in theaters, 2 years after its premiere at the Tribeca Film Festival. Her career has been monumental, and it has been a challenge to include all of the most important milestones in this video. And there are many more films, shows, and performances that she has been involved in, as well as an armful of books. Shirley MacLaine has worn many masks through her life, many of them fascinating, and not a little eccentric. She was aware of her flaws, but did not always seem to have the tools to remedy them. She said herself, "You have to be talentedly insecure in order to be a good actress. And then it's the director's job to make you more miserable and get a good take." It seems she was uniquely driven by escapism and total fantasy, while also conversely having a very grounded view of politics which at times were well-intended, and at others felt like she was banging a drum for easily celebrated causes. She wants to help people wherever she can, and yet has not managed to form a bond with her own daughter. Her compulsion for fantasy and tales of grandeur led her to tell her daughter, so Sakshi claimed in her book, that her real father was an astronaut named Paul, who had long since departed for the Pleiades star system, and that Sakshi was not conceived sexually, but was a direct clone of this Paul. Such talk might be brushed off as eccentric, and indeed Shirley, in typical forthright fashion, denounced her daughter's claims as false. But whether true or not, it appears that at times she could not come back down to earth enough to appreciate those things closest to her, such as her family. But for anyone to achieve what she managed to, there can be no doubt that some sacrifices would have to have been made. And as for her beliefs on her reincarnated forms, maybe it's all just a form of spiritual acting by a master of the craft. "When times are bad," she said, "people like to lose themselves in the sheer glamour of another period." I'd like to invite you all to check out our online store, which has a range of new t-shirts featuring your favorite Hollywood mystery stars in these exclusive designs. With Christmas on the horizon, they would make great gifts for the movie buff in your life, and they are also a fantastic way to help out the channel. I love bringing you these episodes every Saturday, but it certainly makes the work-life balance a lot easier when we have the support of our viewers. Otherwise, why not check out all the fun stuff on offer over on Patreon or our YouTube members area. Until next week, sweet dreams.